My name is Susan Miller, and I'm 58 years old. For 30 years, I believed that being a mother meant putting your child first always and without question. I worked 2 jobs, sacrificed my dreams, and gave everything I had to raise my son Michael after his father walked out on us. I thought love meant endless giving, endless support, endless availability. But sometimes the people we love most teach us the hardest lessons about our own worth. When does a mother's unconditional love become a burden to the very child she's trying to protect? Before I share this story that changed everything for me, please let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button if you've ever felt unappreciated by someone you've sacrificed everything for. Subscribe to hear more real-life stories that remind us we're not alone in our struggles. Now let me take you back to the day my world shifted forever. When Michael was 8 years old, his father decided that family life wasn't for him anymore. Just like that, I became a single mother with the mortgage bills piling up and a little boy who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. I'll never forget the way Michael's face crumpled when I had to explain that sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love. That night, I made a promise to myself and to my son. I would be enough for both of us. I would fill every gap his father left behind, and Michael would never feel abandoned again. I started working at the local diner during the day, serving coffee and burgers to construction workers and traveling salesmen. The pay wasn't much, but it covered our basic expenses. In the evenings, I cleaned offices downtown, pushing a cart full of supplies through empty hallways while Michael did his homework in the break room. He'd sit at those plastic tables surrounded by vacuum cleaners and cleaning products working on his math problems while I scrubbed floors and emptied trash cans. Those were hard years, but they were also precious ones. Michael and I became a team. We'd walk home together after my night shift, pointing out constellations and making up stories about the people in the lit windows we passed. On weekends, we'd pack peanut butter sandwiches and spend entire afternoons at the park throwing a baseball back and forth until the sun went down. When other kids in his class went on expensive field trips, I made sure Michael could go too, even if it meant I ate nothing but cereal for dinner that week. When he needed a new bike, I worked extra shifts for 3 months to afford it. When he showed interest in piano lessons, I found a way to pay for them, even though it meant I couldn't fix the leaky roof until the following spring. Michael thrived despite our circumstances, or maybe because of them. He understood the value of hard work because he watched me fight for every dollar. He was grateful for what we had because he knew how much effort went into providing it. His teachers always commented on how polite and responsible he was, how he helped other students and never took anything for granted. As he grew older, Michael's academic talents became obvious. He sailed through high school with straight A's, earned a partial scholarship to a prestigious university, and graduated summa cum laude with a degree in finance. I was so proud I could barely contain myself at his graduation ceremony, sitting in that auditorium in my best dress, the one I'd bought specifically for this moment, watching my son accept awards and accolades. After college, Michael landed a position at a respected investment firm in the city. He rented a nice apartment, bought his first car, and seemed to be living the successful life we'd always dreamed of. During those early years of his career, he'd call me every Sunday evening telling me about his work, his new friends, the restaurants he was trying, and the places he was discovering. But as time went on, those Sunday calls became less frequent. Michael was climbing the corporate ladder quickly, working longer hours, attending networking events and client dinners. I understood that success required sacrifice, and I was genuinely happy that he was building the kind of life I'd never been able to give him as a child. The first sign that something fundamental was shifting came when Michael missed my birthday for the first time in 30 years. He sent a flower arrangement with a card that simply said, "Sorry I couldn't make it, Mom. Work is crazy right now." I stared at those flowers for a long time, trying to convince myself that this was just a phase that ambitious young professionals had to prioritize their careers. Everything changed the day Michael called to tell me about Jessica. I could hear the excitement in his voice as he described this amazing woman he'd met at a company mixer. Jessica was a lawyer, he said, brilliant and sophisticated, from a family that owned several successful businesses. She'd graduated from an Ivy League school and spoke 3 languages fluently. "She's incredible, Mom," Michael gushed. "She's nothing like anyone I've ever met before. She's so worldly and elegant. I think you're really going to love her." I was thrilled for him, of course. My son had found someone special, someone who appreciated his intelligence and ambition. I immediately started planning how I could welcome Jessica into our little family, imagining holiday dinners and birthday celebrations with this wonderful woman who'd captured Michael's heart. When I finally met Jessica 3 months later, She was everything Michael had described and more, tall and poised with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expensive handbag that probably cost more than I made in 2 months. She shook my hand with a firm grip and a polite smile, complimenting my home and thanking me for the dinner I'd spent all day preparing. But there was something in her eyes, a coolness that I couldn't quite identify. When I asked about her family, she spoke about them with a detached professionalism, mentioning their various business ventures and properties. When I tried to share stories about Michael's childhood, she listened with the same polite attention she might give to a weather report. Throughout dinner, Jessica asked careful questions about my work, my hobbies, my future plans. Her tone was friendly enough, but I felt like I was being interviewed rather than getting to know my son's girlfriend. She seemed to be cataloging information about me, filing it away for some future purpose I couldn't understand. After they left that evening, I called my sister Patricia, trying to process my conflicted feelings. "She seems lovely," I told her, "but there's something I can't put my finger on. Maybe I'm just being overprotective." Patricia, who had always been more direct than me, said, "Susan, you're allowed to trust your instincts. Just because someone is successful and educated doesn't mean they're right for our Michael." Over the following months, Jessica's influence on Michael became increasingly apparent. He started using phrases he'd never used before, talking about optimizing his social network and strategic life planning. He began canceling our regular dinners, explaining that Jessica thought it was important for them to establish their independence as a couple. When I offered to help them paint Michael's apartment or to bring them home-cooked meals, Jessica would politely decline, saying they preferred to handle things themselves or that they were too busy to coordinate schedules. Every attempt I made to be involved in their relationship was met with a gentle but firm rejection. The most painful part was watching Michael start to see our relationship through Jessica's eyes. He began making comments about how I'd been over-involved in his life, how he needed to establish better boundaries, words that sounded nothing like my son words that seemed to come from someone else entirely. I tried to adapt to give them the space Jessica seemed to require, but every time I pulled back, the distance between Michael and me grew wider. I felt like I was losing my son inch by inch, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The engagement announcement came through a Facebook post. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my morning coffee when the notification popped up on my phone. There was Michael down on one knee in some expensive-looking restaurant, slipping a ring onto Jessica's finger while she beamed at the camera. The caption read, "She said yes, can't wait to start our new life together." I stared at that post for 20 minutes, reading it over and over again, trying to process the fact that my son had gotten engaged without telling me first. We used to tell each other everything. There was a time when Michael would have called me immediately after proposing, excited to share every detail of the moment. When I finally called him, he seemed genuinely surprised by my hurt feelings. "Mom, I was planning to tell you," he said. "We just wanted to share the news with everyone at the same time. Jessica thought it would be simpler that way." Jessica thought. It seemed like every decision in Michael's life now began with those two words. The wedding planning process was even more painful than the engagement. When I offered to help with invitations, Jessica explained that they'd already hired a professional coordinator. When I suggested contributing to the catering costs, Michael told me they had everything under control financially. When I asked about the guest list and the ceremony details, Jessica would give me vague responses about keeping things intimate and elegant. 3 weeks before the wedding, I received my invitation in the mail like any other guest. The heavy cardstock was embossed with gold lettering, announcing the marriage of Jessica Marie Hampton and Michael James Miller at the Hampton family estate. There was no mention of the bride and groom's families, no acknowledgement that this was my son's wedding, too. The ceremony itself was beautiful, but felt like a performance I wasn't part of. I sat in the third row behind Jessica's extended family and college friends wearing the navy dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Michael looked handsome in his tuxedo, but when he glanced in my direction during the processional, there was no special smile, no moment of connection between us. During the reception, I found myself at a table with distant relatives and family friends I'd never met. The conversations were polite but superficial, focused on business dealings and vacation homes. When the best man gave his toast, he talked about how Michael had evolved since meeting Jessica, how she'd helped him become more sophisticated and focused. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone about the Michael. I knew the boy who used to build blanket forts with me on rainy afternoons, who cried when we had to give away our old cat, who worked 3 part-time jobs in college so I wouldn't have to take out additional loans. But I sat there quietly, smiling and applauding at the appropriate moments, feeling like a stranger at my own son's wedding. The final blow came when Jessica's father stood up to make a toast welcoming Michael into their family. He spoke about how proud they were to have such an accomplished young man joining their business ventures and family traditions. There was no mention of Michael's own family, no acknowledgement of the people who had shaped him into the man Jessica had fallen in love with. After the wedding, things got worse instead of better. Michael and Jessica moved to a house just 10 minutes away from her parents' estate, 45 minutes farther from me than his old apartment had been. They established new holiday traditions, spending Thanksgiving and Christmas with the Hampton family, leaving me with brief visits and leftover time slots. When I tried to express my feelings about these changes, Michael would become defensive, saying I was being dramatic and possessive. He'd remind me that he was a married man now, with new responsibilities and priorities. Every conversation seemed to end with me apologizing for feelings I couldn't control and needs I couldn't express. I decided I couldn't continue living in this limbo of half-relationship any longer. Michael was my son, and I deserved to understand where I stood in his life, even if the truth was difficult to hear. I spent days planning what I would say, how I could express my feelings without seeming needy or demanding. I invited Michael over for dinner on a Thursday evening, preparing all his favorite foods from childhood: pot roast with carrots and potatoes, green bean casserole, and apple pie for dessert. I set the table with the good china we used to use for special occasions, hoping to recreate some of the warmth we'd once shared. Michael arrived 20 minutes late, apologizing and explaining that he'd had to finish up some important paperwork at the office. Throughout dinner, his phone buzzed constantly with text messages from Jessica. He'd glance at the screen, type quick responses, then look back at me with a distracted smile. "The food is delicious, Mom," he said, but I could tell his attention was elsewhere. "Jessica and I have been so busy lately with the house renovations and her family's annual charity gala. We're planning a trip to Europe next month for our delayed honeymoon." I listened to him talk about his new life, his new priorities, his new experiences that didn't include me. Finally, when there was a pause in his monologue, I took a deep breath and dove into the conversation I'd been rehearsing. "Michael, I need to talk to you about something that's been weighing on my heart," I began carefully. "I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't understand why. Ever since you married Jessica, I feel like there's no place for me in your life anymore." His expression immediately shifted from distracted to annoyed. "Mom, please don't start this again. We've talked about this before. I have a wife now and adult responsibilities. I can't be calling you every day and running over here for dinner twice a week like I used to." "I'm not asking you to do that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just want to feel like I matter to you, like our relationship means something. I raised you by myself for 20 years, and now I feel like you're embarrassed by me." Michael's phone buzzed again, and he glanced at it automatically before responding. "That's not fair, Mom. You're making this about you when it should be about my happiness. Jessica and I are building a life together, and sometimes that means making difficult choices about how we spend our time." The conversation continued to escalate despite my attempts to keep things calm. Michael accused me of being overly emotional and dependent on him. He said that Jessica had helped him realize how unhealthy our codependent relationship had been, how I'd made him feel guilty for pursuing his own dreams and ambitions. "You always made everything about how much you sacrificed for me," he said, his voice rising. "Do you know how much pressure that put on me? How guilty I felt every time I wanted to do something for myself instead of spending time with you?" I was stunned by the anger in his voice, by the resentment I'd never known existed. "Michael, I never meant to make you feel guilty. I made those sacrifices because I loved you, because I wanted to give you the best life possible." "But I never asked you to sacrifice everything for me," he shot back. "Those were your choices, and now you expect me to spend my entire adult life paying you back for them. That's not love, Mom. That's emotional manipulation." The words hit me like physical blows. This was my son, the child I'd given everything to protect and nurture, accusing me of manipulating him with my love. I felt tears starting to form, but I blinked them back, determined not to prove his point about my being overly emotional. Michael stood up from the table, checking his phone again. "Look, I should probably head home. Jessica is expecting me and we have an early morning tomorrow." I couldn't believe he was just going to walk away in the middle of this conversation, leaving all these painful words hanging between us without any resolution. I followed Michael to the front door, desperate to salvage something from this disastrous evening. "Please don't leave like this," I pleaded. "Can't we at least try to understand each other? I just want to know how to be part of your life without making you feel pressured or guilty." Michael paused with his hand on the doorknob, and for a moment, I thought he might sit back down and we could work through this together. Instead, he turned around to face me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold and distant and utterly final. "Mom, you need to accept reality," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "You are not a priority in my life anymore. Jessica is my priority now. Our future family is my priority. The life we're building together is my priority. You need to learn how to live your own life instead of trying to live through mine." The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. I felt something break inside my chest, something fundamental and irreparable. This was my child, the baby I'd nursed through fevers and nightmares, the boy I'd cheered for at baseball games and graduation ceremonies, telling me that I was no longer important to him. "Michael," I whispered, "how can you say that to me? After everything we've been through together, after everything I've done to support you." His expression didn't soften. If anything, he looked irritated by my emotional response. "And that's exactly the problem, Mom. You keep talking about everything you've done for me like I owe you something for it. I didn't ask you to sacrifice your dreams or work 2 jobs or stay single all those years. Those were your choices, and now I'm making mine." I tried one more time to reach the son I thought I knew. "But I'm your mother. Doesn't that mean anything? Don't I deserve at least some consideration in your decisions?" Michael's phone buzzed with another text from Jessica, and he glanced at it before answering. "You're my mother, which means you should want what's best for me. What's best for me is building a successful marriage and career with Jessica. If you really love me, you'll respect that, and stop trying to make me feel guilty for having adult priorities." He opened the door and stepped out into the cool evening air. "I need you to understand that things have changed permanently. Jessica and I are starting our own family traditions, our own life together. You can either accept that and find a way to be supportive, or you can keep fighting it and push me away completely. But I'm not going to keep having this same conversation with you." With that, he walked to his car, got in, and drove away without looking back. I stood in my doorway watching his taillights disappear down the street, feeling like I was watching my son disappear from my life forever. I closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down to sit on the floor as the full impact of what had just happened hit me. The house felt enormous and empty around me, filled with 30 years of memories that apparently meant nothing to the person they were supposed to matter to most. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I walked through the house looking at pictures of Michael and me, remembering all the moments that had led us to this point. There was his first day of school, nervous and excited in his new sneakers, his high school graduation grinning as he accepted his diploma, his college move and day when we'd both cried a little as I helped him unpack his dorm room. I'd built my entire identity around being Michael's mother, and now he was telling me that identity was no longer wanted or needed. More than that, he was suggesting that my love had been a burden to him, that my sacrifices had been selfish acts of manipulation rather than genuine care. By the time the sun came up, I had made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, I called the office of Helen Carter, the family lawyer who had helped me with my divorce papers 20 years earlier. Helen was now in her 60s, a sharp-minded woman who had built her practice helping people navigate the most difficult transitions in their lives. "Susan," Helen said when I explained why I was calling, "I can't say I'm surprised to hear from you. Unfortunately, I see this situation more often than you might think. Adult children who forget the people who sacrificed everything to get them where they are." Helen's office was exactly as I remembered it, filled with law books and family photos, comfortable chairs that invited honest conversation. She listened carefully as I explained the details of my relationship with Michael, the changes since his marriage, and the devastating conversation we'd had the night before. "What I want to understand," Helen said when I finished, "is what you're hoping to accomplish by changing your will. This is a significant decision that will have lasting consequences." I had thought about this question all night, and I knew my answer. "Helen, I've spent 30 years building a financial legacy for Michael. The house is paid off and worth about $300,000. I have $150,000 in savings accounts that I've accumulated by living modestly and working extra shifts. My life insurance policy will pay out another $200,000 when I die. Helen nodded, taking notes as I spoke. All of this money, all of these assets, I saved them for Michael because I wanted him to have security and opportunities I never had. But last night he made it clear that I am not a priority in his life. He told me that I need to live my own life instead of trying to live through him. I paused, gathering my thoughts. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I want to change my will to reflect my new priorities, just like Michael has changed his priorities to reflect his new life. Helen leaned forward slightly. What did you have in mind? I want 60% of my estate to go to the Single Mothers Support Network, the charity that helped me when Michael was little and I was struggling to make ends meet. I want 30% to go to my sister Patricia, who has always been there for me and who helped me raise Michael when times were tough. And I want 10% to go to Michael, just enough to show that I haven't forgotten him completely. Helen raised an eyebrow. That's quite a change from your current will, which leaves everything to Michael. Are you certain this is what you want? I am absolutely certain, I replied. Michael told me that I need to learn how to live my own life and make my own choices. Well, this is my choice. I'm choosing to support people who value what I have to offer, people who don't see my love as a burden or my sacrifices as manipulation. Helen spent the next hour walking me through the legal implications of the changes I wanted to make. She explained how the new will would be structured, what would happen to my assets, and how the beneficiaries would be notified after my death. I want to add one more thing, I said as we were finishing up the paperwork. I want to change the beneficiary on my life insurance policy as well. Instead of Michael, I want the payout to go to establish a scholarship fund for children of single mothers who want to attend college. Helen smiled at this addition. That's a beautiful way to honor your own experience while helping others. As I signed the new documents, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in months, I was taking control of my own life instead of waiting for Michael to decide what role I would be allowed to play in his. After leaving Helen's office, I drove to the community center where I'd first received help as a young single mother. The Single Mother Support Network was still there now, housed in a larger space with updated facilities. I introduced myself to the current director, a woman named Maria, who reminded me of myself 30 years earlier, determined and caring, despite being overwhelmed by responsibilities. When I told Maria about my planned donation, she was speechless. Mrs. Miller, do you understand how much good this money could do? We could expand our child care program, provide more job training, maybe even start a small housing assistance fund for mothers transitioning out of dangerous situations. Driving home that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was finally living my own life, making my own choices, supporting causes that mattered to me. Michael had told me I needed to stop living through him, and he was right. It was time for me to discover who Susan Miller was when she wasn't defined entirely by being someone's mother. Over the next several months, I threw myself into creating a life that was truly my own. I started volunteering at the community center twice a week, helping other single mothers navigate the challenges I remembered so well. I joined a book club at the local library and discovered that I loved discussing literature with people who appreciated my thoughts and opinions. I took up yoga, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for when I was working multiple jobs and raising Michael. I started taking weekend trips to nearby towns, exploring antique shops and local restaurants, rediscovering the simple pleasure of doing things just because they made me happy. Most surprisingly, I began to develop genuine friendships with women my own age. Patricia introduced me to her neighbor Dorothy, a retired teacher whose husband had passed away the previous year. Dorothy and I bonded over our shared experience of rebuilding our identities after major life changes. Through Dorothy, I met Linda and Carol, two other women who had raised children and were now exploring who they were beyond their roles as mothers and wives. We started having dinner together every Thursday night, sharing stories and supporting each other through the challenges of this new phase of life. During this time, Michael called me exactly 3 times. The first call was 2 weeks after our confrontation, a brief conversation in which he asked if I was feeling better about our situation. I told him I was learning to accept the reality he had described, and he seemed satisfied with that response. The second call came a month later when he and Jessica were having a dinner party and needed my recipe for the apple pie he'd always loved. I gave him the recipe, but declined his half-hearted invitation to attend the party, saying I had other plans with my new friends. The third call happened in early spring, about 4 months after our devastating conversation. Michael's voice was different this time, warmer and more genuine than it had been in months. "Mom," he said, "Jessica and I have been talking, and we think it might be nice to have you over for dinner sometime soon. We've been so busy with the house and work, but we want to make sure you know you're still important to us." I was quiet for a long moment, surprised by how little this olive branch meant to me. 6 months ago, an invitation like this would have filled me with joy and relief. Now it felt like a casual afterthought, something they were offering because it was socially expected rather than genuinely wanted. "That's very kind of you, Michael," I said carefully, "but I'm pretty busy these days with my volunteer work and my friends. Maybe we can find a time that works for everyone in a few weeks." There was surprise in Michael's voice when he responded. "Oh, okay. I didn't realize you had so much going on. What kind of volunteer work are you doing?" For the first time in our recent conversations, I heard genuine curiosity in his question. I told him about the single mother support network, about the women I was helping, and the satisfaction I found in giving back to an organization that had once helped me. Michael was quiet for a moment before saying, "That sounds really meaningful, Mom. I'm glad you found something that makes you happy." After we hung up, I realized that this was the first conversation we'd had in months where Michael seemed to see me as a complete person rather than just his demanding mother. Ironically, it had taken me stepping away from that role for him to notice that there was more to me than my relationship to him. 6 months after changing my will, I received a text message from Michael that would test everything I had learned about my new priorities and my own worth. The message was simple and direct. "Mom, Jessica, and I are ready to buy our first house together. The one we want is perfect, but a bit above our budget. We were hoping you might be able to help us with the down payment. We know you've always wanted to support my future, and this would really help us get started. Can we talk about it this weekend?" I stared at that message for a long time, remembering all the years I had dreamed about being able to help Michael buy his first home. I had imagined being part of that milestone, celebrating with him and Jessica, maybe helping them move or decorating their first place together. But now, reading his request, all I could hear were his words from that terrible night, "You are not a priority in my life anymore." He had made it clear that I should focus on living my own life, and that's exactly what I had learned to do. I thought about the single mothers I was helping at the community center, women who were struggling to provide basic necessities for their children. I thought about the scholarship fund that would help students like Michael had once been kids with potential but limited resources. I thought about my sister Patricia, who had been there for me through every difficult moment of my life without ever making me feel like a burden. When I finally responded to Michael's text, my message was shorter than his had been. "I'm sorry, but that won't be possible. As you told me, you're an adult with your own priorities, and I've learned to have my own priorities too. I hope you and Jessica find a way to achieve your goals together." My phone rang within 10 minutes. "Mom, what do you mean it won't be possible?" Michael's voice was confused and slightly irritated. "You've always said you wanted to help me succeed. This is exactly the kind of thing you've always offered to do." "You're right," I said calmly. "I did always want to help you succeed, but you made it very clear to me that my help was no longer needed or wanted. You told me I needed to live my own life instead of living through yours, and that's what I'm doing now." Michael was quiet for a moment before responding. "Mom, I think you're misunderstanding what I said. Of course I still want your support. I just meant that I couldn't have you being so involved in every aspect of my daily life." "I understand perfectly what you said, Michael. You said I was not a priority in your life anymore. Those were your exact words. So, I've adjusted my priorities accordingly." The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had. For the first time in our relationship, I was the one setting boundaries and Michael was the one trying to negotiate them. He alternated between confusion, frustration, and something that sounded almost like panic as he tried to understand why I was suddenly unavailable to him. "This isn't like you, Mom," he said finally. "You've never been selfish before. Why are you acting this way now?" The word selfish stung, but not in the way it once would have. Instead of making me feel guilty, it made me feel strong. "I've learned that taking care of myself isn't selfish, Michael. It's necessary. For 30 years, I made you my top priority. Now I'm making myself and my values my priority. I'm supporting people who appreciate what I have to offer." When we hung up, I felt sad but not shaken. Michael would figure out his housing situation with Jessica and her family's resources. He was a successful, intelligent adult who had made it clear that he didn't need his mother's help to navigate his life. The real test of my new resolve came 3 weeks later when Patricia called to tell me that Michael had reached out to her asking if she could talk to me about reconsidering my decision. "He seems genuinely upset, Susan," Patricia said. "He keeps saying he doesn't understand why you're being so stubborn about this. He thinks you're punishing him for getting married and starting his own life." I appreciated Patricia's honesty, but I also knew she would support whatever decision I made. "What do you think I should do?" Patricia was quiet for a moment before answering. "I think you should remember what you told me 6 months ago about feeling like you didn't matter to him anymore. You've spent this time building a life that makes you happy and helps other people. Don't let guilt trick you into going backwards." That conversation with Patricia helped me realize how much I had changed over the past year. The old Susan would have been devastated by Michael's disappointment and would have immediately offered to help despite feeling hurt and unappreciated. The new Susan could feel sad about the distance between us while still maintaining the boundaries that protected her own well-being and values. 2 months later, I learned that Michael and Jessica had purchased a smaller house with help from her family. According to Patricia, who heard it from a mutual friend, they seemed happy with their choice and were settling in well. I felt genuinely glad for them and realized that my refusing to help hadn't actually harmed them in any meaningful way. What it had done was teach me that I could love my son without sacrificing my own needs and dignity. I could wish him well without making his happiness more important than my own. Most importantly, I could be a good mother without being an available mother to an adult child who had made it clear that my availability was more burden than blessing. The woman I had become over that year was someone I actually liked and respected. I had friends who valued my company work that gave my life meaning and a sense of purpose that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or gratitude. For the first time in decades, I was living authentically as Susan Miller, not just as Michael's mother. This transformation became complete one evening in late fall, almost exactly a year after Michael had told me I wasn't a priority in his life. I was having dinner with Dorothy, Linda, and Carol when Linda asked me something that stopped me short. "Susan," she said, "you seem so much happier and more confident than when I first met you. What changed for you this year?" I thought about her question for a long moment before answering. "I think I finally learned the difference between loving someone and losing yourself in that love. I spent so many years thinking that being a good mother meant having no needs or boundaries of my own, but I realized that actually made me less lovable, not more." Carol nodded knowingly. "My daughter and I went through something similar when she got married. I had to learn that the best thing I could do for our relationship was to become a whole person again, not just her mother." "Exactly," I agreed. I thought love meant endless sacrifice and availability, but real love means being healthy enough to give freely rather than giving from a place of need and expectation. Michael was right when he said I needed to live my own life. He just didn't realize that doing so would mean I'd have less to give him, not more. That night, driving home from dinner, I felt a deep sense of peace about the choices I had made. I didn't regret loving Michael completely during the years when he needed that love, but I also didn't regret learning to love myself enough to step back when that love was no longer serving either of us. The final piece of this story came 6 months later when I received a letter from Michael that I almost didn't recognize as being from my son. The handwriting was his, but the tone was unlike anything he'd ever written to me before. "Dear Mom," the letter began, "I've been thinking a lot about our relationship this year, and I owe you an apology. I realize now that I was angry at you for things that weren't your fault, and I said some things that I can never take back." The letter continued for 3 pages, with Michael reflecting on his childhood, acknowledging the sacrifices I had made, and expressing genuine appreciation for the love and support I had given him. Most importantly, he seemed to understand that his cruel words had been a reflection of his own struggles with independence rather than accurate assessments of my character or intentions. "I know I can't undo the hurt I caused," the letter concluded, "and I understand if you don't want to have a relationship with me anymore. But I want you to know that I see now what you were trying to give me all those years, and I'm sorry I wasn't mature enough to receive it with the gratitude it deserved." I read that letter several times, and while I felt touched by Michael's words, I was surprised to discover that they didn't change anything fundamental for me. His apology was meaningful, but it couldn't restore the relationship we used to have. Too much had been said and too much time had passed. More importantly, I had learned to be happy without his approval or gratitude. I had built a life that fulfilled me independent of his recognition or appreciation. His letter was a gift, but it wasn't a gift I needed in order to feel whole. I did write back to Michael thanking him for his honesty and telling him that I forgave him completely. I also told him about the life I had built for myself, the work I was doing, and the peace I had found. I invited him to be part of this new life if he wanted to, but made it clear that our relationship would need to be based on mutual respect and genuine care, rather than guilt or obligation. We began having lunch together once a month after that casual meetings where we talked about our lives without the heavy emotional baggage that had characterized our previous interactions. Michael seemed to appreciate this new dynamic, and I enjoyed getting to know him as an adult rather than trying to maintain our old mother-child relationship. The most beautiful part of this whole experience was discovering that stepping back from being Michael's mother had actually made me a better mother to him. When our relationship was based on choice rather than need, when I had my own life and identity to draw from, I could offer him genuine support and wisdom rather than anxious hovering and emotional manipulation. I never told Michael about changing my will, and I probably never will. That decision wasn't about punishing him or teaching him a lesson. It was about aligning my actions with my values and ensuring that my legacy would support people and causes that truly mattered to me. The money I've designated for the Single Mother Support Network will help dozens of women build better lives for themselves and their children. The scholarship fund will give opportunities to students who might not otherwise be able to afford college. Patricia will be able to enjoy her retirement years with additional financial security, and Michael will receive enough to know that I didn't forget him, but not so much that he'll take my love and sacrifice for granted ever again. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give the people we love is the freedom to miss us, to realize what we meant to them when we're no longer constantly available. Sometimes love means stepping back far enough to let them discover whether they actually want us in their lives rather than simply expecting us to be there. I don't regret the 30 years I spent putting Michael first. Those years taught me about the depth of love I was capable of, and they gave him the foundation he needed to become a successful adult. But I also don't regret the moment I decided to put myself first. That decision taught me about my own worth and showed me that I was capable of so much more than just being someone's mother. The woman writing this story today is not the same woman who sat on her kitchen floor crying a year and a half ago. I am stronger, more independent, more confident, and paradoxically more loving than I was when I thought love meant endless self-sacrifice. I learned that real love isn't about losing yourself in another person. It's about being whole enough to choose to share your life with them. It's about caring enough about your own well-being to model healthy boundaries. It's about loving people enough to let them grow beyond their need for you. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to start living your own life. It's never too late to discover who you are when you're not defined entirely by your relationships to other people. It's never too late to choose dignity over desperation, self-respect over self-sacrifice. Michael taught me the hardest and most valuable lesson of my life when he told me I wasn't a priority anymore. He taught me that I needed to become a priority to myself. For that lesson, despite all the pain it took to learn it, I will always be grateful. If you've ever felt taken for granted by someone you've given everything to, please know that you have the power to change that dynamic. You have the right to expect the same consideration and respect you give to others. You deserve to be valued for who you are, not just for what you can provide. Love yourself enough to step back when your love isn't appreciated. Trust yourself enough to build a life that doesn't depend on anyone else's validation. Be brave enough to discover who you are when you're not trying to be everything to everyone else. That's the most important thing I can share from this whole experience. Your worth isn't determined by how much you sacrifice for others. Your value doesn't decrease when you start taking care of your own needs. Real love, lasting love, can only exist between whole people who choose each other freely, not people who cling to each other out of need or habit. I hope my story helps you remember that you matter just as much as the people you love. I hope it gives you permission to start living your own beautiful, authentic life. Have you ever experienced a relationship where you felt taken for granted despite giving everything you had? How did you find the strength to set boundaries with someone you loved? Share your thoughts in the comments below and hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your strength and worth. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to put themselves first sometimes. Thank you for listening to my story and for reminding me that we're all on this journey of learning to love ourselves and others in healthier ways. I wish you the courage to know your worth and the wisdom to never settle for less than you deserve.